The double doors of Jefferson Heights High swung open hard enough to knock the homecoming banner sideways, and what came through them was not a student, not a teacher, and not anything the front office secretary Lou had ever had to deal with in her 22 years working the desk. It was a dog. Not a stray, not someone's escaped pet. A Belgian Malinois in a black K9 tactical vest, all 80 pounds of it running low and fast like a heat-seeking thing, its claws throwing sparks of sound off the freshly waxed corridor floor. It ignored the screaming. It ignored Lou, who knocked her coffee across the reception window, trying to grab for her desk phone. It ignored the cluster of sophomore boys who threw themselves against the lockers, one of them dropping an armload of textbooks with a crash that echoed all the way to the gymnasium. The dog ran like it knew exactly where it was going, which it did. The morning had started the way most Monday mornings did for Avery Dodd, with a headache she hadn't quite earned and a to-do list she had no hope of finishing. Avery was the school nurse at Jefferson Heights High, had been for 3 years, and she had learned early that the job was less about medicine and more about patience. Most days she handed out ice packs and bandage strips and called parents who didn't answer, and by 2:30 she went home to her apartment on Maple and fed her cat, and that was that. She was 31 years old. She wore her hair pinned back and kept her scrubs plain navy and her shoes sensible white New Balance. She was the kind of person who could stand in the center of a crowded room and still somehow be forgettable. People talked around her at faculty meetings. Principal Tabor called her Nurse Amy twice in September before she gave up correcting him. She had learned not to take it personally. She knew who she was, even when no one else did. This Monday, the first 2 patients arrived within 15 minutes of each other. The first was Marco Ibarra, a junior on the boys' varsity track team. He came in at 8:12 a.m., moving slowly, one hand on the doorframe like he needed it to stay upright. His skin had a grayish, wrong-looking cast under the fluorescent lights, and his pupils were constricted to something barely bigger than pinpoints. "I feel weird," he told Avery, which she already knew from looking at him. She sat him down and took his pulse, 54 beats per minute, which was low even for a long-distance runner. His hands were cold. He said his chest felt heavy and he'd been nauseous since 6 a.m. "Did you eat this morning?" she asked. "Coach Pryor gave us new pre-workout before practice," Marco said, blinking slowly. "Said it was from a new sponsor, like a sample thing." He reached into the pocket of his track jacket and pulled out 2 small foil packets, the kind protein powder sometimes came in, and set them on her desk. The label read, Apex Edge. Performance Fuel, printed in blocky red and black letters with a stylized lightning bolt. No manufacturer address. No dosage information on the front panel. Avery looked at the packets. Looked at Marco. Something in her chest went very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with calm. "These are both yours?" she asked. He gave us 2 each. Said to take one before practice and save one for game day. Marco rubbed the back of his neck. "I only took the one." The second patient arrived 4 minutes later. Brianna Kolth, a sophomore, also on the track team, also moving like the floor kept tilting under her feet. Same grayish skin, same slow blink. Same story Coach Pryor before first period pre-workout sample. Avery had both of them lying down, vitals every 5 minutes. Water. A blanket for Brianna, who had started shivering. She called the front office and asked to speak to Principal Tabor. "Vic," she said when he picked up, and she almost never used first names because he almost never gave her the opportunity. "I have 2 track athletes in here showing symptoms I don't like. I need to know if anyone else took a supplement from Coach Pryor this morning." There was a pause. "It's probably just nerves," Tabor said. "We've got state qualifiers in 3 weeks. These kids stress eat. Their pupils are pinned, Vic." Another pause, longer. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm calling poison control." She hung up before he could redirect her. Poison control picked up on the second ring. She described the symptoms: bradycardia, meiosis, nausea, pallor, altered alertness. And she described them precisely, the way she'd been trained to. Not with the soft vagueness of someone hedging their words, but with the flat accuracy of someone who had done a lot of this before. The toxicologist on the line asked her to repeat the pupil description. She did. That's consistent with opioid exposure, the toxicologist said. Are these students recreational users? They're 16-year-old student athletes who took a pre-workout supplement from their coach. A beat of silence, then call 911. She already had her phone in her hand. She had expected police. She had not expected the dog. The 911 dispatcher had told her units were en route, and Avery had gone back to monitoring Marco and Brianna, pulling out her 2 doses of naloxone from the locked cabinet above her desk, setting them on the counter within reach. She was running through the arithmetic of who else might have taken the supplement. How many kids on the track team? How many practice sessions? How many packets? When she heard it. Not sirens, which were still several blocks out. Something else. A crash from the direction of the main entrance, and then the high, startled sound of multiple people yelling at once, and then something that sent a primal signal straight up Avery's spine. The rhythmic, purposeful impact of a large animal running hard on a hard floor, getting louder with every second. Marco sat up. What is? The door to the nurse's office opened. The Malinois came through it like it had been moving toward that specific door its entire life. It was enormous in the small room, or seemed that way, the tactical vest making it broader, the low ceiling pressing down on the space between them. It didn't growl. It didn't snap. It cleared the distance between the doorway and Avery's desk in 2 strides, then stopped, dropped its haunches to the floor, and looked directly at Avery's face. Its eyes were amber, sharp, completely certain of themselves. Then it whined. Not aggression, not pain, but the specific high, sustained sound of a dog that has been trained to communicate something urgent and is now communicating it as clearly as it knows how. Avery did not move. She kept her hands flat on the desk and met the dog's eyes and felt the particular stillness that had come back to her in tight moments for the past 3 years. The same stillness that had been drilled into her at Fort Campbell and tested in places she still didn't talk about over dinner. She was aware of Marco pressing himself against the wall. She was aware of Brianna making a small, frightened sound from the cot. She focused on the dog. The handler came through the door 30 seconds later, breathing hard, one hand on his radio, and the other raised palm out toward Avery. Officer Dade Kessler was lean, somewhere in his mid-30s, with the kind of steady eyes that came from doing a job that required them. He was wearing patrol gear and a windbreaker with Denver Police stenciled across the back. "Ma'am, I need you to not move," he said. "I'm not moving," Avery said. "Who is he?" "His name is Jax. He's a narcotics K9. Kessler was scanning the room, his eyes moving fast. "He doesn't alert like this unless he's found something," Avery said. "I know." That made Kessler look at her more carefully. "He's alerting on you, ma'am." "He's alerting on my desk," Avery said. She didn't raise her voice. She kept it even and factual. "Those 2 foil packets right there. Take a look." Jax had not taken his eyes off the desk. He hadn't moved. His body was held in the particular controlled tension of a working dog in full focus. Not aggressive, but absolutely certain. Kessler moved around the side of the room, keeping distance, and leaned in to look at the packets without touching them. He read the label. His jaw shifted. Where did these come from? A student brought them in. A coach at this school handed them out to the track team during morning practice. Avery paused. "I've already called poison control. These 2 kids are showing signs of opioid exposure. I need you to find out how many more students might have taken one." Kessler stared at her for a moment. The kind of stare that was trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he was looking at, which was a quiet woman in plain navy scrubs in a school nurse's office who was talking to him like she was the one running the briefing. Then his radio crackled. A patrol officer, breathless. "We've got a student down in the main hallway, east corridor, unresponsive. EMS is 3 minutes out." Avery was already moving. She grabbed the naloxone off the counter, the 2 pre-filled auto-injectors she had set out 40 minutes earlier because some trained part of her had told her to have them ready, and she moved past Kessler. "Excuse me," was all she said, and she said it in a tone that didn't leave room for argument, and then she ran. The east corridor was 2 turns and a straight shot from the nurse's office, and she covered it fast. There was already a cluster forming. 2 teachers, 3 students, a custodian who had dropped his mop, all of them standing in the loose, helpless ring that untrained people form around someone who has collapsed, because being nearby feels like helping even when it isn't. On the floor was a boy Avery recognized. Dev Amara, 11th grade, sprinter, the kid with the fastest 40-yard dash in the school's recent memory. He was on his back, breathing but barely. Slow and shallow, with a long pause between each inhale that made the people standing around him go increasingly still. Avery dropped to her knees. She checked his airway, tilted his head, found his pulse at the carotid. 48 beats per minute. His lips had a faint blue tinge at the corners. She pulled the cap off the first naloxone auto-injector, pressed it to the outer muscle of his thigh, clicked it. "What is she doing?" one of the teachers asked, to nobody in particular. "Administering naloxone," said Officer Kessler from behind Avery. He had come around the corner after her and stopped, watching. He had seen paramedics do this. He had not expected to see it done by a school nurse in a hallway, without hesitation, without waiting for permission from anyone, while the nearest ambulance was still 2 minutes out. Dev Amara's breathing changed within 90 seconds, deepened. His eyelids moved. Avery sat back on her heels and looked up at Kessler. "Coach Pryor," she said. "He's still in this building. He knows we know. You need to find him right now." Kessler had his radio up before she finished the sentence. Coach Alden Pryor had been at Jefferson Heights for 6 years. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, with the easy smile and the can-do attitude that made parents feel good about dropping their kids off at 6 a.m. practice. He coached boys track and cross-country and had taken the team to state 2 years running. He remembered every kid's personal record. He showed up to their other games, wrote college recommendation letters that actually got read, brought pizza when they placed. Parents sent him Christmas cards. A few had lobbied Principal Tabor to give him a teaching position on top of the coaching stipend. What none of them knew, what no one at Jefferson Heights had any reason to suspect, was that Coach Pryor had been supplementing his income for the past 14 months by distributing fentanyl analogs through a supplier out of Colorado Springs who packaged them in counterfeit sports nutrition packets and sold them through fitness communities and, most recently, most lucratively, through high school athletic programs whose coaches were willing to take a cut. Pryor had not thought of himself as a drug dealer. He'd thought of himself as a middleman. A guy who took a small risk for a reasonable reward, and the kids just performed better and recovered faster and never asked questions because the results were right there in their split times. He had not anticipated a narcotics K-9 unit doing a sweep in the area that morning. He had not anticipated Nurse Dodd. He found out the sweep was happening the same way everyone else did. The screaming in the main corridor, radio chatter leaking through doors, a patrol officer appearing at the gymnasium entrance telling him to stay where he was. Pryor stayed where he was for approximately 40 seconds, enough time to pull out his phone, send a text to a number he then immediately deleted, and move to the boys' locker room at the back corner of the building with the bag from his office supply closet that had not yet been distributed. He was 3 feet from the window latch when he heard the locker room door. Not barking. That would have been almost less frightening. It was the impact of the door itself. 200 pounds of steel swinging open like it weighed nothing, followed by a sound that was barely a sound, more of a presence, moving fast across concrete. Pryor turned. Jax crossed the room in under 2 seconds. He didn't go for the throat. He hit Pryor at knee level, a controlled, targeted strike. 78 pounds of velocity and training that took the man's legs out from under him and put him on the floor of the boys' locker room with a force that rattled every locker door in the row. The bag skidded under the bench. Pryor screamed, a high and undignified sound, and tried to pull his arm back, and Jax held it with a pressure that made it very clear the arm was not going anywhere. Kessler came through the door 30 seconds later, weapon drawn. "Jax, hold." The Malinois held. Pryor did not resist the handcuffs. He was shaking too hard. The bag held 43 packets of Apex Edge submitted to the Denver Police Crime Lab and confirmed to contain carfentanil, a synthetic opioid analog approximately 10,000 times more potent than morphine, used sometimes in veterinary sedation, used here in quantities carefully calibrated to read as stimulant to cause, on first exposure, in a teenager running winds October air, in 40-degree October air. Devamara was transported to Denver General. Marco Ibarra and Brianna Kolth followed 20 minutes later. All three were stabilized and discharged within 72 hours with no permanent injury. The attending physician at Denver General, reviewing the case with the toxicology team, noted in his report that the outcome would have been substantially worse without the early naloxone administration and that whoever administered it had done so with clinical precision. The report said school nurse on scene. Nobody at the hospital knew her name. Avery was still in her office when Kessler came back to find her. It was past noon. The school was locked down. Crisis counselors were in the building. Principal Tabor was in the parking lot doing interviews with the local news. His reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the way he always wore them when he wanted to look thoughtful. Avery had watched the top of his head through the window and gone back to her desk. She was sitting very still. There was a cup of tea Lou had brought her, gone cold. On the desk in front of her were the 2 empty naloxone cartridges she'd carried back from the corridor, and the single full one she hadn't needed to use. She'd had 3 doses. She'd needed 2. She was doing the math in her head of what would have happened if she'd only had 2. She was also thinking, in the private part of herself she didn't show anyone at work, about a forward operating base outside a village she still couldn't pronounce correctly. About a medic bag in the dust and a count of 11 minutes and the particular quality of silence that follows the moment when things either go one way or the other. She was 31 years old, and she had been a school nurse for 3 years. And before that, she had been Specialist Avery Dodd, 68 Whiskey, United States Army, 2 tours. A commendation she kept in a shoebox under her bed and a medical discharge that came with a physical therapist's number and not much else. The shrapnel scar on her left arm was 5 inches long and had taken 3 surgeries to close properly, and she wore long sleeves even in warm weather. Not out of vanity, but out of the habit of not explaining herself to people who hadn't asked. She heard the knock at her open door and looked up. Kessler stood in the doorway. He had Jax with him on leash, and the dog was relaxed now, ears up, tongue out, looking around the nurse's office with the mild curiosity of an animal who has already done his job and found it satisfactory. His tail swung in a slow, easy arc. "You okay?" Kessler asked. "Fine," Avery said, which was what she always said. Kessler came in and sat down in the chair across from the desk, the one Marco had sat in that morning, which felt like a long time ago. Jack settled at his feet and put his chin on his paws and closed his eyes halfway. "Priors in custody," Kessler said. "Carfentanil, distribution to minors, criminal endangerment, and the DEA is already looking at federal charges. The supplier in Colorado Springs is flagged. This goes wider than Jefferson Heights." He paused. "The 3 kids are going to be fine." "I know," Avery said. He nodded slowly. His eyes went to the naloxone cartridges on the desk. "You had those out before we got here?" "Yes." "You called it before poison control confirmed." "I had a good read on the symptoms." He was quiet for a moment in the thoughtful way of someone choosing how to ask the next thing. "Naloxone is standard in schools now," he said. "But the way you administered it." He shook his head slightly. "I've watched paramedics work. You moved faster than most of them. You didn't look for permission. You didn't hesitate. You just..." He stopped. "Where did you learn to do that?" Avery looked at him for a moment. Then she reached up and rolled the sleeve of her left arm slowly upward, the fabric bunching past her elbow. The scar ran from an inch below her wrist to the crook of her arm. Jagged, old, the kind that had been through several rounds of treatment and still wasn't what anyone would call subtle. The kind that told its own story to anyone who had seen similar ones. Kessler's expression didn't change. but something in it settled, like a piece clicking into place. Fort Campbell, Avery said. Before that, Bagram. Before that, a place I'd have to pull out a map to explain properly. 2 tours. She pulled her sleeve back down. 68 whiskey, combat medic. Kessler was quiet for a long moment. Why the school? He asked finally. Avery looked out the window. October light across the parking lot, still half full of police vehicles, the news van with its satellite dish, turning slowly toward the building. Principal Tabor was gesturing to a reporter, one hand sweeping wide. I got out 4 years ago, she said. I thought it would be quieter. Kessler glanced at the scene beyond the window. Then he looked back at her. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close. How's that working out for you? Avery looked at the 3 naloxone cartridges on her desk, 2 empty. 1 full. 3 kids who were going to wake up in a hospital room and go home by Thursday. Ask me tomorrow, she said. Jax lifted his head and looked at her. Those same amber eyes, still certain of themselves, still completely sure they had found exactly what they were looking for. His tail swept once across the floor. Then he stood up, walked the 2 steps to Avery's side of the desk, and leaned his broad head against her knee and stayed there. She reached down, slowly, and rested her hand between his ears. It had been a long morning. Coach Alden Pryor was formally charged 11 days later. 3 counts of distribution of a controlled substance, analog to a minor, 1 count of criminal endangerment, and 2 federal charges added by the DEA when they traced the supply chain to a lab that had been running for over 2 years. His supplier was arrested on a Wednesday. The network reached 6 other high schools across the Front Range and was dismantled over the following month. Pryor pleaded not guilty. He was held without bail. Marco Ibarra returned to practice 6 days after his discharge from Denver General. He ran a personal record at the regional qualifier in November. Dev Amara was slower to come back, not physically, but in the particular way of someone who has had something happen to them that they don't yet have the words for. Avery saw him in the hall sometimes, and he always paused, just briefly, like he was about to say something. She never pushed. She understood the pause. She had been living inside one for 4 years. Officer Dade Kessler submitted a formal commendation to Denver PD on behalf of Avery Dodd. Early identification of opioid exposure, preemptive preparation of naloxone prior to police arrivals, immediate response to the 3rd student's collapse, accurate identification of the suspect. He went back and added things to the document twice before he sent it, because he kept thinking of details that should be in there. Principal Tabor gave a statement to the local news in which he described the school's tremendous coordinated response and mentioned the nursing staff twice, without using any specific names. Jax received a commendation from Denver PD's K-9 unit and a new rope toy that he destroyed in 40 minutes. Avery Dodd received a letter from the school board, which she read once and put in the same shoebox under her bed as the Army commendation. Then she went back to her office and restocked her supply cabinet and made a note to reorder naloxone because she was down 2 doses, and that was not how she ran her room. She was the kind of person who could stand in the center of a crowded room and still somehow be forgettable. But she had stopped trying to decide whether that was a problem, because she had learned that the people who needed her, the ones who needed her to be exactly what she was, in exactly the right moment, they always found her. Sometimes they arrived with 4 legs and a tactical vest, with amber eyes certain of themselves in a way that reminded her of the best soldiers she had ever known. And sometimes that was enough. If this story of quiet courage, quick thinking, and an unbreakable bond between a K-9 and the woman he found when it mattered most moved you, leave a comment below telling us what stayed with you. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs a reminder that heroes come in all forms, and subscribe to Kind Tales for more stories like this one.